Hey guys, welcome to the Edison Writing Center's APEC Essay screencast. Today I will be taking you through how to plan your next APEC essay, what you can do to improve your score and increase your confidence in your ability to write a convincing HOA paper. See, planning is an important part because it allows you to organize your ideas and strengthen your argument using claims and evidence. Now, assuming that you've been given the question that you'll be responding to, it's easy to plan out and practically write your entire essay even before the day of the essay, and it only takes a few minutes. The first step in preparing for your APEC essay is to compile the ideas that you've been given onto a piece of paper. The way that I do this is by constructing a web. It's basically a brain dump of all my ideas onto paper. This web allows you to see all of your ideas, and it gets your thought processes out on paper where you can see them. For example, assuming we were given the question, evaluate the economic, political, and social successes and failures of Reconstruction, we might construct a web like this. Now you can see here that I've added a few points that I might make in my paper, and basically these points fall under successes or failures of Reconstruction, but I haven't divvied them out into political, social, or economic categories yet. We'll save that for a bit later. But basically this first step is intended just to pour out all the ideas that you might have, kind of like if you, poured out a box of crayons before you picked which color you were going to use. It may seem like it's a bit less organized, but some people are visual learners, and I find for those of you who are, this helps a lot more, simply because you can see kind of all your ideas laid out, and then that will allow you to put them in categories like political, social, and economic categories and successes and failures categories, and that will, I think, help you formulate clear assertions and concise assertions, and because of that you can write a more detailed essay, and thus your paper will be more convincing and persuasive, which is ultimately the point of these APEC essays. Now, getting down to it, our question is, evaluate the economic, political, and social successes and failures of Reconstruction. Now, the first point that I thought of was the Freedmen's Bureau, and basically the Freedmen's Bureau was a bureau established to further the practical skills of African Americans, and basically it was intended to teach African Americans things that they hadn't learned when they were slaves, and allow them to better themselves in a growing world. And because of that, we'd consider that a success. Another success is the Enforcement Acts of 1870 and 1871. Now, this actually could go either way. I'd say it's a success for the fact that it had honest intentions, but you could also say it was a failure because it was disrupted by another thing. But let's assume right now that we're saying this is a success. The Enforcement Acts of 1870 and 71 were intended to make sure that the bitter Southerners, those plantation owners and those that disliked African Americans, it was basically intended to protect the rights of the newly established rights of African Americans from these Southerners who had just lost a majority of their workforce after the Civil War, and for that reason, we'd say that it is a success. Another success are the passing of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which basically gave African Americans rights that they'd never had before, citizenship and voting rights, and because of that, we'd say that that is a success. Now, we may add in here some more points that are both successes and failures. For example, the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, we might say, is a failure, simply for the fact that under his presidency, the federal troops were removed from the South, which gave way to the KKK and the White League and other bands who ganged up on African Americans who had just been freed. And without the protection of these federal troops, these African Americans were in constant danger of being lynched and being publicly humiliated and other terrible things by these bands of people. And so because of that, we may consider this a failure. Another failure, or at least a failure that we may be using, is sharecropping. And Sharecropping has honest intentions, much like the Enforcement Acts, and basically it was meant to give African Americans some sort of stature or position, a job, so to speak. However, many had to defer to sharecropping because they didn't have the ability to travel north, or they didn't have the ability to get a job or become functioning members of society, so they had to resort to sharecropping, which was ultimately just a version of slavery under a different name, and because of this we would consider sharecropping a failure. Black codes being established was another failure of Reconstruction because it only gave way to pre-Civil War like mindsets in the South, and basically discriminated against blacks and made this discrimination legal, which hadn't been done before. Another thing that it did was it basically overruled the Enforcement Acts that were mentioned before, and because of that we would say that it is a failure. Now, I said earlier that the Enforcement Acts could be a success or a failure. We said that the Enforcement Acts were a success, but the Black Codes were a failure, but they're related. So what we could say is that the Enforcement Acts were a failure because of the Black Codes, or there's different ways that we can put it. But just for the sake of this paper, we'd say that the Enforcement Acts were a success and the Black Codes were the failure on the other side of the coin, so to speak. One more success that I thought of were the, the upbringing of W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. And these two gentlemen, while they were different in their mindsets, both served as inspirational figures to African Americans at this time, and because of that I feel that they are a success, maybe we could say a social success, because ultimately we're talking about things not being the same for African Americans as they were before the war. I think you can agree the mindset that we have when we're talking about successes are revolutionizing the rights and the community of African Americans, and through that we talk about the Freedmen's Bureau, the Enforcement Acts, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and these inspirational leaders who are springing up in different places as ways or examples of African American culture being revolutionized through Reconstruction. Now, what we can do here is, now that we've got a few ideas, we're going to stop here in terms of pouring out ideas, but there are certainly more that you could use in the essay. These are just a few that we'll be using to show how organization of your essay is important. So we've got these ideas, and the first thing I want to do is go through and label which ones are successes and which ones are failures. So we'll say this is a success. Enforcement Acts we're saying is a success. These amendments are a success. Election of Rutherford B. Hayes is a failure. Sharecropping, sharecropping we said was a failure. And the establishment of Black Codes is a failure. And lastly, these two men, and many more. For example, General O.O. Howard may have been another inspirational leader, but we're going to say just these guys for now. We're going to say that this is a success. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we've labeled successes and we've labeled failures, but we need to go through and talk about the economic, political, and social aspects of these successes and failures. So what we do now is go through each of these and organize them into categories that we are ultimately going to be using for our assertions. So for each one of them, I'm going to color them different colors. Freedmen's Bureau, we may say is we could say it's a political or social success. Actually, we could say it's an economic success as well, I think. Actually, we'll leave that one for last in case we need one more in any category. But next is the Enforcement Acts of 1870 and 71, and I would say that these are a political success because they are acts. So political, we're going to label this green color. Passing of 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, also an act, we're going to say is political. Election of Rutherford B. Hayes, this one is a failure, but again, it is political. Sharecropping, we believe, while it is intended to be economic, is more of a social failure because it neglects African Americans the opportunity to escape from this mindset of slavery and that kind of thing. So we're saying that sharecropping is a failure. Black codes being established, this is probably going to be political or social. I wouldn't say that it's economic in any way. But because we haven't come up with we only have one social rather, we're going to go ahead and say that this is a social failure. And then these two men and other inspirational leaders is certainly a social success. And then now we have the Freedmen's Bureau. We don't have many economic, so this could go in any category, keep in mind, but for just the purposes of this essay, let's just say it's a economic success. Let me go ahead and label these so that we know which one is which. Political is green, and social is red. So again, we didn't obviously plan out the entire essay. There are many more points that you may need to make in order to have a convincing essay, but because of this, we've got 3 assertions filled in. One, you may have to come up with another 2 or 3 proofs for the economic assertion, but basically each one of these is a proof that you can use in your essay. So the way that we'd go through and plan this out is we'd have maybe we should change colors here. We'd have assertion 1. I don't know why it's still red, but I'll change that in a second. Is economic successes and failures. And that might be one assertion. And then, let me change that. Our second assertion, which is green, would be the, back to red again, political successes and failures. And then assertion number 3 are the social successes and failures. Now, you've got your 3 assertions mapped out pretty well. And from here, let me give us some space. From here, you can basically take each one of these and plop it under each assertion. So we'll start with our Freedmen's Bureau assertion, and we'll cut it and then put it right there. Alright. Then we'll take our 3 points here that we've made, which are our proofs, cut it, and then put it under our second assertion. And then we'll take the remaining 3 points that we have, which are our social successes and failures, for our third assertion, and we will pop it under there. And so now we've organized our successes and failures into 3 different assertions, which then you can ultimately go to this, your planning document, and you can go through and just copy and paste, essentially. And then all you have left to fill in is your thesis and your conclusion, and then you are done. But I'd like to go back to this page here. I typically do my webs by hand because I find that they're easy to label and that kind of thing. But if you find that it's better on a computer or laptop, definitely tweak your, I guess, study habits in this case so that you can memorize your essay better. But essentially, this will allow you to plan for your APEC essays and practically write the entire thing so that you are prepared for the day of the essay. Thank you very much, and remember to come visit the Edison Writing Center anytime you need tutoring on your APEC planning. And we'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much.